the reasons I've been so upset with the anti-woke community lately is because they really don't seem to acknowledge W's ever. That seems to be the thing with them, is that they're just black-pilled all the time, like gloom and doom, all of our franchises are ruined, when in reality, like all the stuff they're talking about was never good anyway, and that they should just like swallow that pill and just acknowledge it. And that plenty of good stuff still exists. Case in point, Bayonetta 3. One of my favorite games of 2022, an absolute banger. Nintendo Switch exclusive, a game that was written off and ignored by the masses simply for not being Devil May Cry 5. The reception to Bayonetta 3 was embarrassing in general. I've talked about this at length, but I have been thinking a lot lately, especially after like Sega's appearance at Tokyo Pride Parade, like 2024, which is incredibly cringe and is boycott worthy of Sega in general. But when you look at what Bayonetta 3 did and like the reception to it, right? If you look at like the social impact and like the legacy it has, Bayonetta 3 is, I think, one of the most based games we've gotten in a long time. Like, weirdly enough, Bayonetta 3 of all games seems to be the game that's like taking a stand against the woke agenda, right? In a way that like was really triggering for a lot of the SJWs because it emphasized the fact that men and women can start families, right? The entire point of the game was emphasizing like Viola's role in the plot and her legacy and like her wanting to live up to her parents' expectations and how important the family was to each other. And, you know, it was emphasizing the importance of heterosexuality, of the nuclear family, of like male and female being together and creating something new and special, children. The most anti woke thing in existence is emphasizing the importance of family values. This is something that dipshit Raging Golden Eagle doesn't understand and even like tries to cheer on. Like, oh man, you shouldn't have children because that means interacting with a woman. Oh man, all women are terrible. Like, it's incredibly, not only like incredibly depraved and like ridiculous, right? It's completely out of touch with reality. It's also exactly the purpose of feminism, of the establishment, of like the agenda to try and create friction between men and women. You are behaving exactly the way they expect you to. You are a stereotype. You incel, like you fat fuck with a weird accent. Like you you played right into their hands. And even now you're seething about your family thinking you're gay and the fact that you'll never have children because of like your MGTOW lifestyle. Oh, like nobody's dating anymore. It's collapsing. The racket is done. Meanwhile, I'm seeing like happy couples everywhere. Like I saw happy couples everywhere when I went to go see Spy Family the other day. Like clearly, like this illusion that MGTOW is something that's like taking off and like ruining females. It's not true. Never was true. And if anything, you're like screwing yourself over, right? You're not really facing the facts, the reality of the situation, right? Like, so yeah. My point is, Bayonetta 3, because of its themes, because of what it emphasizes, what it was building up to, the fact that like Bayonetta ended up with like her male love interest, right? To me, that like is a very firm rejection of what the establishment wanted from her, right? Because if you've been following along with the series since Bayonetta 2, like you saw like a weird shift in a fan perception of the character, right? There was this weird narrative that the character was a bisexual icon, later a lesbian icon, who was in love with her best friend Jean, and they went on lesbian immortal adventures together forever. Yeah, like it was just like a bunch of fan wank, like ridiculous nonsense. Especially because like if you played Bayonetta 1, you know that like Bayonetta did not know Jean at the time. Like if you played Bayonetta 1, you know who Bayonetta's love interest is, right? And people tried writing that off as like just as just a product of its time or not the directions the characters ended up taking, or they pretended that like some developers supported Bayonetta and Jean being together or something. Like they made up a lot of stuff. And then Bayonetta 3 comes out and it deliberately spits in the face of all of that. I have never seen a game come out and just so thoroughly like destroy the LGBT agenda like the way Bayonetta 3 did. It was kind of amazing, seeing that carefully constructed narrative um that like Luca was just some guy that Bayonetta didn't care about, like just get thrown into the trash where it belongs, right? Like again, I've seen people cope about this. Like I've seen them say that like, well, Bayonetta and Jean are together in most of the multiverses. Not true. We can see that in the game. And the game explicitly states that Bayonetta and Luca are meant to be together. Well, they're it was a retcon. Like, no, it wasn't. This has been set up in the first game. Like, no, it's not canon. Oh, plenty of other developers on the team like really supported the idea of Bayonetta and John being together. No, that's not true. Like, that's pretty observably not true. Like, especially since they didn't create the character. Like it doesn't really matter what like retards that nobody cares about, like JP Kellum say. Like the reality of the situation is that the core creative team behind the property like knew what they wanted from the character. And in fact, like Hideki Kamiya, the absolute Chad, the legend, um, like he specifically came out and said that like seeing this happen, seeing this play out, seeing the backlash to it, like all it did was reaffirm his belief that it is very important to maintain the integrity of the characters and stick with the creator's initial vision. And I do think that's the critical thing here. The thing that like really impresses me about Bayonetta 3 is that there was clearly a lot of pressure put on Platinum Games, put on Sega to make Bayonetta a lesbian, right? To just throw out everything and just pander to this specific demographic. And what ended up happening is that they said no to that. They straight up rejected the notion and did what they were going to do. And I find it appalling, abhorrent that so many people have failed to like really realize what a big deal this is. What a monumental achievement it was for Platinum Games to put out Bayonetta 3 in the state that it was. Like, with its initial vision and character intact. Like it was insanely impressive to me that this happened. And yet you're going to see people like sit there and try to tell you that like well actually there are too many mini games actually Devil May Cry 5 is way better like they're gonna sit there and try to tell you that like Bayonetta 3 was disappointing somehow, and that we would never ever get another one. And of course, we get another Bayonetta game a couple of months later. But like the reality is, the the damage control in regards to Bayonetta 3 did not stick. I think the game is like very well remembered. I think people are going to go back to it, warm up to it, and like realize it was a great game eventually. But like there is this weird stigma regarding it because of the LGBT community, right? They do feel slighted. They are upset because they took such a massive L with Bayonetta. Like the biggest I think they've gotten ever, honestly. Um, they spent years propping up this idea that they were in a relationship, and seeing it all just like collapse was very cathartic to watch. Like Bayonetta 3 was one of the franchises I was most concerned about going woke going into this generation, and yeah, instead we got something unbelievably based instead. But did anyone notice? No. Did anyone care? No. Did anybody celebrate it? No. And this is why the anti-woke community is a complete failure. You should have celebrated this W. You should have celebrated Bayonetta 3. You should have celebrated, supported Platinum Games and Nintendo with this thing, and yet it didn't happen. You were out like, I don't know, like trying to attack Pokemon or something. Trying to like downplay whatever else Nintendo game was coming out that year, right? You didn't care about genuinely good games or like a character like taking such a massive W for like the conservative camp. Like you didn't care about any of that. Like, you don't know that Viola is a really good character in her own right. Like, I remember when people were calling her woke just because of her design, but as it turns out, she's actually a very endearing, likable character. Like, did anyone notice or care about that? No. Bayonetta 3 was completely ignored by the anti-woke community because it did not fit the agenda. The agenda for these grifters has always been that, like, the SJWs have complete control of the industry and nothing good gets produced ever, and, like, we'll never get anything good again. And that simply is not, never has been, and never will be the case. We are going to continue to get great games. You just simply have to support the right developers that put good work into good projects.